England, 1748. The Atlantic held terrible secrets. Secrets the world preferred not to know. Secrets hidden in the holds of ships crossing the ocean. And John Newton was one of those secrets. At 23 years old, John Newton wasn't just a sailor. He wasn't just a merchant. He was a slave ship captain. A man who transported human beings across the ocean as if they were cargo, as if they were merchandise, as if they had no soul. But here's the most frightening part of this story. The part that reveals something dark about human nature. If you asked John Newton what he thought of himself, what he saw when he looked in the mirror, he wouldn't say he was a monster. No, John Newton saw a businessman, a competent professional, intelligent, calculating, practical, a man doing exactly what all the other captains did, a man following the rules of the market. After all, he thought, how could it be wrong? How could it be sin if England itself, the most powerful empire in the world, depended on it? If kings and queens profited from this trade, if banks invested in this business, if even Anglican churches had shares in slave trading companies, that was the lie. The lie John Newton told himself every day, every single day. And he believed that lie with every fiber of his being. But to understand how John Newton became this man, how someone can become so blind, so hardened, we need to go back in time. We need to understand his story, because John Newton wasn't born cruel. No one is born that way. No one is born a monster. He was molded by cruelty, forged by it, broken by it. John Newton was only 7 years old when his mother died. Only 7 years old. The only person who truly loved him, who prayed for him every night, who sang Christian hymns with him, who taught him about God and grace and mercy, disappeared from his life. His father was a cold man, distant, emotionally absent. He didn't know what to do with a boy, didn't know how to be a father, so he did what many men did in that era. At 11 years old, John Newton was placed on a merchant ship. 11 years old, a child, alone, on the brutal sea of the 18th century. There, at sea, John was beaten by the older sailors. He was humiliated. He was treated worse than an animal. Hunger, cold, loneliness, violence. That was his childhood. That was his education. And at 17 years old, something even worse happened. John was sold as an indentured servant to a slave trader on the coast of West Africa. Sold as property. There, in Africa, John Newton experienced firsthand what it was to be another human being's property. Constant hunger, contempt, total and complete dehumanization. He became less than human in his master's eyes. And it was there, in that personal hell, that something broke inside John Newton. Something died. Kindness died. Compassion died. Humanity died. When John finally managed to escape, when he finally managed to regain his freedom and begin to rise in position, he made a choice that would change his life and the lives of thousands of people. He swore to himself, never again will I be the victim. Never again will I be the weak one. Never again will I be the slave. Now I will be the master. And then he became exactly what had tortured him. He became the oppressor. John Newton dove into the slave trade with cold and calculating determination. He memorized the trading routes of the African coast. He studied the markets. He learned which tribes were at war and could supply prisoners. He learned to calculate profits over human lives. He learned to see people as numbers on a spreadsheet. Voyage after voyage, he climbed the ranks, first sailor, then first officer, then second in command. And finally, at 23 years old, John Newton became captain of his own slave ship. And here's the contradiction that reveals the human heart in its darkest and most disturbing form. A contradiction that seems impossible, but was completely real. In the hold of John Newton's ship, 200 human souls were chained, 200 men, women, and children, crammed in spaces where they couldn't even stand up, suffering in unimaginable conditions, many dying during the crossing. And what was John Newton doing up there, in the relative comfort of his captain's cabin? He was calculating the voyage's profits, writing romantic and passionate poems to his wife Mary, waiting for him in England, reading Enlightenment philosophy about freedom, human rights, and dignity. The irony was grotesque. The contradiction was absurd. But John Newton saw no contradiction at all, because he had developed a terrible skill, a skill that all oppressors develop. He had hardened too much to feel. He had built a wall so thick around his heart that nothing could penetrate. No plea, no moan, no desperate look. March 1748. John Newton departed from the coast of Guinea with his ship completely loaded. The voyage would be routine. He had made this crossing many times. Just one more trip, 3 weeks across the Atlantic to Liverpool, guaranteed profit, guaranteed promotion, guaranteed future. But the Atlantic had other plans. God had other plans. On the night of March 10, 1748, something happened that John Newton had never experienced in all his years at sea. A storm, but not just any storm. A storm that seemed to come from hell itself. It was as if the entire ocean had awakened with fury. Waves of 15 meters, maybe 20, rose like black mountains of water around the small wooden ship. Winds that tore the sails as if they were paper. Solid wood, English oak, breaking as if they were twigs. The sailors, men who had spent their entire lives at sea, men who had seen storms before, screamed desperate prayers to the heavens. Water invaded every compartment of the ship. The hull was breaking apart. The ship was literally tearing itself to pieces, and John Newton, for the first time in many, many years, felt something he had buried deeply, something he had sworn never to feel again. He felt fear, but it wasn't fear of dying. Many men at sea aren't afraid of dying. It's part of the risk, it's part of the job. No, what John Newton felt was something much deeper, much more terrifying. John Newton felt, for the first time in years, fear of what would come after death. Fear of judgment, fear of eternity. For the first time in years, he asked himself, what happens to my soul when I die? Where do I go? And suddenly, like a lightning bolt of clarity in the middle of the chaos, all those 200 souls in the hold of the ship, all those lives he had treated as merchandise, as objects, as less than human, became very, very real to him. At 1 in the morning, in the middle of the storm, with water up to his waist, holding a manual pump, pumping frantically, desperately trying to empty the ship that was sinking under his feet, John Newton did something he hadn't done since he was a small child, since before his mother died. His hands worked the pump mechanically, freezing Atlantic water up to his waist, certain death just minutes away, and from his mouth came words he hadn't spoken in over 15 years. He prayed, Lord God, if you exist, if you're listening, have mercy on us, have mercy on me. The words came out automatic, mechanical, empty, a prayer of absolute desperation, not of faith, a desperate bargain, not a sincere plea. But at the exact moment those words came out of his mouth, something made him stop pumping for a second. The word mercy echoed in his mind. Mercy, he was asking for mercy. He, John Newton, the man who never had mercy on anyone, the man who ignored pleas, who separated families, who sold mothers away from their children, who profited from suffering and death. Now he was asking for mercy. The hypocrisy was almost funny, almost if it weren't so tragic. And for 11 hours, while the ship fought against the murderous waves of the Atlantic, while men died around him, while the wood groaned and broke apart, John Newton pumped water, held ropes, plugged holes, and repeated that prayer like a mantra, Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy. He wasn't praying because he believed. He wasn't praying because he believed. He was praying because he had absolutely nothing else.
This is just the beginning of John Newton's transformation. If you want to hear more powerful redemption stories like this, subscribe to Faith Stories, and let's continue.
It was his last card, his last resort. Desperation in the form of prayer. At 6 in the morning on March 11th, when the sun finally began to rise on the eastern horizon, something impossible happened. The storm stopped. The wind ceased as if someone had turned off a switch. The waves began to calm. And the ship, against all odds, against all logic, against all reason, had not sunk. The exhausted sailors inspected the damage when daylight allowed, and they discovered something extraordinary. Something none of them could explain. There was a huge hole in the ship's hull, a hole large enough to sink the ship in less than 30 minutes. But by chance, by pure luck, or perhaps it wasn't luck, there was a cargo of hardwood in the hold that shouldn't have been there, that wood should have been unloaded and sold at the previous port in Africa. But due to an inventory error, due to forgetfulness, or perhaps by providence, it had stayed on the ship. And it was exactly that wood that floated to the hole and blocked it, preventing more water from entering. If that wood hadn't been there, everyone would have died, everyone without exception. The sailors, superstitious men of the sea, immediately called it a miracle, a direct act of God, divine intervention, a sign from the heavens. John Newton, skeptical by nature, rational by training, still tried to call it luck, coincidence, statistical chance. But even as the words left his mouth, he knew it was a lie. Something happened inside John Newton that dawned, something small, almost imperceptible, like a microscopic crack appearing in a solid wall, a fissure small, but real, and growing. It was like light entering for the first time into a prison that had been completely dark for years, just a ray, thin but real. John Newton staggered down to his soaked cabin. He searched among his wet and destroyed belongings, and he found something he didn't remember bringing. The only religious book on the entire ship, an old, worn copy, with pages stained with salt water, of a book called The Imitation of Christ. He didn't know why that book was there, didn't remember buying it, didn't remember packing it, but it was there. It survived the storm, like a sign. And for the first time since childhood, since before his mother died, John Newton began to read about God, about faith, about redemption, about grace, about mercy. And for the first time in his adult life, John Newton allowed himself to ask a dangerous question, a question that could change absolutely everything. What if those superstitious sailors were right? What if God really answered my prayer? What if he really saved us? What if he saved me? But why? Why would God save someone like me? After everything I've done, after all the lives I've destroyed, after all the suffering I've caused, why? That question haunted him. The voyage back to England took 30 days. 30 long and slow days across a now strangely calm ocean, as if the ocean was holding its breath. And during those 30 days, something absolutely extraordinary began to happen inside John Newton. A transformation, slow, painful, confusing. He read that wet book, reread it, meditated on the words, prayed, not beautiful or eloquent prayers, confused prayers, full of doubt, full of questions, full of anger even. And then, he began to do something he had never done in all his voyages as captain. He began to regularly go down to the hold, and for the first time, really for the first time in years, he looked, not just saw, he saw beyond the surface. He didn't see merchandise, didn't see cargo, didn't see investment or profit or numbers. He saw human faces, eyes that looked back at him, real pain, real suffering, real humanity. And something in him began to crack, to break, to crumble. He began to give different orders: more food, fewer hours chained, more time on deck for fresh air, more space, less brutal treatment. It wasn't kindness yet. He still didn't understand what genuine kindness was, but something inside him was changing profoundly and he couldn't name what it was. When the ship finally arrived at the port of Liverpool in April 1748, John Newton stepped on English soil as a different man. Not transformed yet, not converted yet, but different, changed, marked forever. But the journey of real transformation was only beginning. Because now, a question pursued him day and night, sleeping and awake. If God saved me in that storm, if he really, genuinely saved me, what does he want from me? Why am I still alive? What is the purpose of my life? John Newton never returned to sea, accepted an administrative position on dry land. He married Mary Catlett, the love of his life since adolescence. He bought a modest house. He tried to live a normal life, respectable, comfortable, quiet. But there was no peace. There was no rest. There was no possible escape. Every night, the same images returned: chains, moans, screams, empty eyes of despair and pain, the unbearable and nauseating smell of death and suffering. Faces whose names he never knew, but that now haunted every nightmare. And the question that tortured him more than any other: how? How did I do that? How did I live that life? How did I feel nothing? How did I sleep peacefully? How did I become that man? How did I become a monster? John Newton began to desperately search for answers. He studied theology. He sought out pastors. He asked difficult questions. He wrote journals confessing everything, every detail, every sin committed. And in 1754, 6 long years after that storm in the Atlantic, John Newton finally wrote the words that revealed the brutal truth he had finally discovered. Words that changed everything for him. I was a blind man who thought he saw perfectly. A dead man who thought he was alive. A slave who thought he was free. I was the greatest of the wretched, the most lost of the lost, and I didn't even know I was wretched. Didn't even know I was lost. It was in that exact moment, in that moment of brutal and painful clarity, that John Newton finally understood the complete truth. He wasn't saved from the storm that night in March. The storm was just the beginning of the story. He was saved from something much, much worse than any ocean storm. He was saved from himself. 16 years after that storm, John Newton is now 39 years old, and he made a decision that absolutely shocked everyone who knew him. Everyone. Friends, acquaintances, other captains, merchants. John Newton became a pastor, an Anglican pastor, in a small rural village called Olney, a tiny and poor church, a miserable salary, a congregation of peasants, farmers and simple workers. From captain of a profitable ship to pastor of a poor church, from wealth and comfort to poverty and simplicity, from fame and respect to total anonymity, from social relevance to complete irrelevance. Of all the paths he could have chosen, he chose this one, the most unlikely, the most humble, the most unexpected. But for the first time in his entire life, John Newton was free. Truly, genuinely, deeply free. He preached every Sunday to those simple peasants and humble workers, and he preached about one theme, always the same theme. Only one theme mattered to him: grace. He preached tirelessly about a God who forgives the unforgivable, about a grace that reaches the unreachable, about a mercy that transforms the completely untransformable, about a love that makes no rational sense at all. And when the village people asked him, "Pastor Newton, how do you know this? How are you so sure of this grace you preach? How do you know God really forgives that much?" John Newton answered, "Always, always," with tears running down his face, "because he forgave me. If God can forgive someone like me after what I did, he can forgive absolutely anyone." The slave ship captain had died. The hardened man had been completely broken, and in his place, a new man was born. A broken man, yes. A marked and scarred man, yes. But finally, a man truly alive. New Year's Eve, 1772, 24 years after that storm that changed everything. John Newton, now 47 years old, hair beginning to turn gray, is alone in his small, cold office. He's preparing a special sermon for the New Year's service for his small and faithful congregation. He takes a blank sheet of paper, takes his writing quill, dips the quill in the inkwell, and then, instead of writing a traditional sermon, he begins to write something different. A poem, a public confession, a prayer, a testimony of a transformed life. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Amazing grace, what a sweet sound that saved a wretch, a miserable one, a condemned one, a lost one, like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see. I was lost, completely, desperately lost, but I was found. I was blind, totally blind, but now I see. Finally I see. Every word he wrote carried the weight of 24 years of journey. From brutal storm to impossible redemption, from absolute darkness to growing light, from blindness to sight, from spiritual death to abundant life. John Newton had no idea, had no notion, but in that small cold office, on that simple winter night, he was writing the words that would become the most sung hymn in human history, a hymn that would be sung by literally billions of people for the next 250 years and counting, at solemn funerals and joyful weddings, in humble churches and grand cathedrals, in packed stadiums and silent rooms, in moments of deep mourning and moments of ecstatic celebration. The personal testimony of a former slave trader would become the greatest hymn of hope and redemption the world has ever known. But John Newton's story doesn't end with that extraordinary hymn. It doesn't end with that transforming poem. No, John Newton lived to be 82 years old, and he dedicated every day, every week, every month, every remaining year of his long life to a single consuming mission: undo the evil he had done, break the chains he had forged, free those he had imprisoned, fight against the system he had served. He became a close friend, mentor, and spiritual counselor to a young and promising politician named William Wilberforce, the man who would lead, decades later, the victorious fight for the abolition of slavery in the entire British Empire. And in 1788, 40 full years after that transforming storm, John Newton did something absolutely extraordinary and courageous. He wrote and publicly published a pamphlet titled Thoughts Upon the African Slave Trade. In it, without hiding anything, without self-pity, without seeking justifications or excuses, he confessed everything, publicly, every horrible detail, every sin committed, every victim, and he ended that courageous pamphlet with these words that reveal a completely, radically transformed heart. I hope it will always be a subject of humiliating reflection to me, that I was once an active instrument in a business at which my heart now shudders. That pamphlet was read aloud in the British Parliament. It was widely distributed throughout England and beyond. It was translated, it was used as crucial key evidence in the growing abolitionist movement, and in 1807, exactly 59 years after that storm in the Atlantic that started everything, just 1 year after John Newton's death, England finally abolished the slave trade in the entire empire. The man who had profited immensely from chains helped to break them. The man who had sold human souls helped to free them. The man who had been blind helped an entire nation to finally see. John Newton died peacefully on December 21, 1807, at 82 years old, in his simple home in London, surrounded by those he loved. In the last years of his life, his memory was rapidly failing. He forgot the names of dear friends. He forgot important dates. He forgot familiar faces. He forgot where he was. He forgot who the country's president was. But there was one thing, one single thing he never, absolutely never forgot. Not once when someone asked him about his life, about his long journey, about his extraordinary story of redemption. John Newton always, without failing once, repeated exactly the same words, like a sacred mantra, like an essential confession, like an eternal testimony. My memory is nearly gone, my mind is failing, I'm forgetting almost everything, but I remember, I will always remember two things, only two essential things: that I am a great sinner, and that Christ is an even greater Savior. This is the story of John Newton. From the bottom of the abyss to the light of redemption. From slave ship captain to author of the most sung hymn in history. From hardened man to witness of transforming grace. Not the story of a perfect saint, but the much more powerful story of real grace. Grace that reaches to the bottom of the darkest sea. Grace that breaks the strongest chains, first in the human heart, then in the entire world. Truly amazing grace. And if you're watching this story now, perhaps you're thinking, I've done too much, too many terrible things. I've hurt too many people. I've sinned too much. It's too late for me. I'm too lost to be found. I'm too blind to see. I'm too dead to live again. John Newton's story answers with one word: no, it's not too late. You're not too lost. It's not impossible. It doesn't matter how deep you are in the abyss. It doesn't matter how dark your past is. It doesn't matter what you did or didn't do. Grace can reach you exactly where you are right now. And when that grace finally reaches you, when you finally allow it to enter, it doesn't just change you. It changes the entire world through you. It breaks chains. It frees captives. It brings light where there was only darkness. This is the eternal promise of amazing grace. This is the hope that never dies. This is the truth that crosses centuries. Amazing grace. How sweet the sound.